Madam President.
The Majority Leader.
Now, yesterday evening, after months of persistence, hard work, and arduous negotiations, a bipartisan group of senators released the text of the Emergency National Security Supplemental Package. The bipartisan package is 4 long, tireless months in the making. Everyone worked doggedly to piece this bill together, from senators to Senate staff to the Biden administration. I must have called the negotiators hundreds of times, calling every day, multiple times a day. I want to thank President Biden for his leadership and for making it clear from day one that he was willing to compromise with Republicans to get this agreement done. I wish to thank my Senate colleagues who worked ceaselessly on this package, including Senators Murphy, Sinema, Langford, Murray, Collins, as well as Secretary Mayorkas and the rest of the administration. And all of our staffs worked so long and so diligently. We are blessed in this Senate to have great, hardworking, dedicated staffs. Now, at times, I know, it seemed as if negotiations would fall off the tracks. Many on the outside rooted loudly for this effort to fail. But everyone persisted and persisted. Even in dark moments, I reminded my colleagues of the immense stakes in this bill. And to their everlasting credit, they kept moving forward. And now we have a bill. The $64,000 question now is whether or not senators can drown out the outside noise, drown out people like Donald Trump who want chaos, and do the right thing for America. I urge senators of goodwill on both sides of the aisle to do the right thing and turn the chaos out. History is going to look over our shoulders and ask if the Senate rose to the occasion. We must act. In a few moments, I will file cloture on the motion to proceed to the vehicle of the National Security Supplement. The vote will be the most important that the Senate has taken in a very long time to ensure America's future prosperity and security. That's how important the vote on this National Security Supplemental is. Senators should expect the first vote on this bill to come Wednesday. Everyone will have had 3 days to read this bill before taking a vote. We must keep working until the job is done. Passing this bill is too important to let the calendar get in the way. Now, getting to this point was never guaranteed. A security package that includes bipartisan border legislation is one of the hardest things the Senate has tackled in years. From the start, I said the only way we would succeed was if both sides were serious about reaching a bipartisan package. I worked very hard to give negotiators the space they needed to do their work and create an environment where bipartisanship could take root. Many on the hard right wanted to hijack this process by demanding we take up H.R. 2. But I made clear the only bill I would bring to the floor was one that could win bipartisan support. Not a single Democrat in the House or Senate voted for H.R. 2. Today, I am proud that after 4 months of hard negotiations, we indeed have a bipartisan agreement that is a product of compromise, hard work, and persistence. I am hopeful that enough senators understand that this bill is too important to let politics get in the way. Because if we fail the Ukrainian people, then Vladimir Putin will likely succeed in his invasion of Ukraine. Putin will be emboldened, and Western democracy will face the greatest threat it has seen in decades. If we don't help Israel defend itself against Hamas, the dangers of another October 7th will persist, and the war in the Middle East could grow much worse. If we don't deliver humanitarian aid to Gaza, countless of innocent Palestinian civilians will be denied life-saving assistance that cannot wait. And if we don't secure our border right now, the crisis our Republican colleagues talk about so much is only going to get worse. Everyone agrees the border's a mess. For years, our Republican colleagues have demanded we fix the border. And all along, they said it should be done through legislation Only recently did they change that when it looked like we might actually produce legislation. Well, we are producing legislation in a bipartisan way. And now, unfortunately, many on the hard right are turning their back on this package. Everyone's asking the same question. Are MAGA Republicans serious about fixing the border, or is this merely political? Now, if Senate Democrats wrote this national security supplemental entirely on our own, of course it would look different. But we live in an era of divided government, and that means that both sides have to compromise if we want to pass a bill. This bipartisan agreement is not perfect, but given all the dangers facing America, it is the comprehensive package our country needs right now. It'll provide tens of billions in military assistance for Ukraine, so they have more access to javelins, ammunition, stingers, howitzers, and more. It gives Israel the security assistance it needs to resist those who wish to wipe out a Jewish state off the map. It delivers life-saving humanitarian assistance, food, water, medicine, clothing, not just for innocent civilians in Gaza, but for growing humanitarian needs around the world, and it holds the line against the Chinese Communist Party in the Indo-Pacific. And it has other items we're very proud of, too. Hundreds of millions for the nonprofit security grant to protect synagogues, churches, mosques, HBCUs, and other nonprofit organizations victimized by discrimination and hate. This is something I've worked very hard to secure for years. It also includes the Fend Off Fentanyl Act, something we worked very hard on to pass in the Defense Authorization Bill, and we're glad it has been included here. And of course, thanks to months and months and months of hard work by Senators Murphy and Sinema, Langford, Murray, and Collins, and our staffs, and many, many others who provided their input, this supplemental package is a real opportunity for Congress to finally address America's borders and make progress towards a more efficient and well-resourced system. It will cut years of delay in the asylum process while ensuring fair outcomes. It will invest in more frontline personnel and provide more funding to the border. Make no mistake about it, fixing our immigration system will not finish with this bill. Democrats will keep fighting to reach our ultimate goal of comprehensive immigration reform. I believe so strongly in comprehensive reform. And as you will recall, I led the Gang of Eight in 2013 to pass it, and we will keep fighting for it once our work on this supplemental is done. Now, in coming days, I urge senators on both sides to think carefully about what's at stake in this legislation. This moment, this bill, the actions here in the next few days are an inflection point in history, where the security of our nation and of the world hangs in the balance. I know a majority of senators want to get this done, and I know it will take bipartisan cooperation to move quickly. It's not going to be easy, but senators owe it to the American people to tune out the political noise coming from the outside and do the right thing for our country, our beloved country. This moment demands the Senate to show leadership. It harkens back to the decades and moments when senators did rise to the occasion. It demands the Senate's decisive action. In the coming days, I hope the Senate can, once again, rise to the occasion, lead America forward. I yield the floor. Madam President,
Majority Leader.
I move to proceed to calendar number 30, H.R. 815.
The clerk will report the motion. Motion to proceed to calendar number 30, H.R. 815, an act to amend Title 38, United States Code, and so forth, and for other purposes.
I send a cloture motion to the desk.
The clerk will report.
Cloture motion. We, the undersigned senators, in accordance with the provisions of Rule 22 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, do hereby move to bring to a close the debate on the motion to proceed to calendar number 30, H.R. 815, an act to amend Title 38, United States Code, and so forth, and for other purposes, signed by 17 senators as follows.
I ask consent the reading of the names be waived.
Without objection.
I note the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Baldwin.
Madam President,
The Republican leader,
I ask consent that further proceedings on the quorum call be dispensed with.
without objection.
4 years ago, as a candidate for the Democratic nomination, President Biden promised his base functionally open borders. Quote, I would in fact make sure that we immediately surge to the border all those people who are seeking asylum. That was President Biden as he took office. 3 years ago, as people surged to the border, they insisted that the president had told them to come. And by his actions, we know they were exactly right. The Biden administration invited a crisis at our southwest border. In the tradition of Washington Democrats dating back decades, they chose an issue over its solution. And then they made it worse. The President of the United States threw out essential border security tools like Remain in Mexico, froze new funds for common sense measures like border wall construction, and abandoned the brave men and women of CBP and ICE to clean up the mess. President Biden's border crisis has upended the life in communities across America. Flows of deadly fentanyl have snuffed out precious lives in states like Kentucky. Catch and release has confronted even the bluest so-called sanctuary cities with the harsh realities of unchecked illegal immigration. And for 3 years, the president and his administration have tried to convince the American people not to believe their own eyes. They tried in vain to pretend that we weren't facing a crisis, but the country knows better. This is a humanitarian and security crisis of historic proportions. And Senate Republicans have insisted, not just for months, but for years, that this urgent crisis demanded action. 3 months ago, we asked our colleague, Senator Langford, to lead that action. In just the time since Washington Democrats finally decided to join him at the negotiating table, the president's border crisis made history all over again. December saw the highest daily and monthly tallies of illegal border crossings ever on record. The crisis has literally never been worse. This is the reality as the Senate begins careful consideration of the border security agreement announced last night. The gaping hole in our nation's sovereign borders on President Biden's watch is not going to heal itself, and the crater of American credibility after 3 years of the president's foreign policy will not repair itself either. Today, our adversaries are emboldened. As terrorists and authoritarian thugs challenge the strongest military in the world, our commander-in-chief is hesitant and self-deterred. It's long past time for the president to demonstrate more resolve and start imposing decisive costs on those who dare to attack America. And it's now time for Congress to take action on supplemental national security legislation that finally meets those challenges head on. I've spoken at length for months about the urgent need to invest in American hard power, stand with our allies, and start showing our adversaries that the world's foremost superpower intends to start acting like one again. My colleagues know where I stand. They know as well as I do that American adversaries in Moscow, Beijing, and Tehran are working together to undermine us. And they know that the time has finally come for the Senate to respond with strength. The national security legislation we're preparing to take up will invest heavily in the capabilities and capacity America and our allies need to regain the upper hand over this emerging axis of authoritarians. Make no mistake, The gauntlet has been thrown, and America needs to pick it up.
The Senate will proceed to executive session to resume consideration of the following nomination, which the clerk will report.
Nomination, Department of State, Kurt Campbell of the District of Columbia to be a Deputy Secretary.
Senior Senator from Illinois.
Madam President, I'm heartened, encouraged that there's finally a bipartisan agreement to provide Ukraine, Israel, Gaza, and Taiwan critical funding to meet their urgent national security and humanitarian needs. It should have happened months ago. But Republicans demanded that any discussion of this assistance be tied to changes in border policy here in the United States, using national security as a bargaining chip and gambling, sadly, with people's lives. The future and fate of Europe, the Middle East, and the Indo-Pacific hung in the balance. Last week, the European Union reached an agreement to provide an additional $54 billion to stand by Ukraine and shore up its war-ravaged economy, bringing the total European Union support well over $100 billion and comparable to what the United States has done. Meanwhile, Vladimir Putin continues to think he has more resolve than we do, reveling in his belief that Western democracy is unable to sustain its rejection of Russian tyranny. But more than just Putin, other destabilizing forces around the world are watching what we do from Iran to North Korea. We must prove to them our commitment to democratic ideals. Our response to Putin's aggression has consequences, not just in Ukraine or even in Russia, but global, historic consequences. In fact, NATO's Secretary General Stoltenberg recently issued a very plain warning to all of us in the West. He said if Putin wins, there is, quote, real risk that his aggression will not end there. Putin will continue to wage his war beyond Ukraine. Further, if other despots sense Western weakness, they will be emboldened to attempt their own aggression. Stoltenberg went on to say, our support is not charity, it is an investment in our country. It is time for Speaker Johnson and Republicans to realize that bipartisanship is the only way to ensure that Ukraine, Israel, Taiwan, and innocent civilians in Gaza will receive critical life-saving assistance. Let's not flinch when it comes to standing up to such obvious threats to democracy and the rule of law. The world is watching, and that is why we must pass this national security package. But this agreement also addresses our immigration policy. And let me be clear, we do need to fix our disastrous immigration laws and secure the border. That has been a fact for more than 3 decades. That's why I've worked for years to pass bipartisan legislation that would fix our immigration system. Leader Schumer came to the floor earlier and recalled the time when the so-called Gang of 8, 4 Democrats and 4 Republicans, worked months to put together a measure which passed with a bipartisan roll call on the floor of the Senate. I was honored to be part of that effort. This bill that we have before us includes important measures, such as a one-time increase in green cards and protections for children of H-1B visa holders who are age out of legal status when they turn 21. But I'm deeply, deeply disappointed that this bill does not include a path to citizenship for dreamers, recipients of temporary protected status, farm workers, or other essentials people who have spent years contributing to our society. These individuals fill a critical role in America. A study showed that undocumented immigrants pay nearly $80 billion in federal and $40 billion in state and local taxes every single year. Many of these immigrants were brought to the United States as children. They don't know any other home. Yet without congressional action, they spend each day in fear of being deported. Madam President, 12 years ago, in response to a bipartisan request from myself and the late Senator Richard Lugar of Indiana, President Obama established the DACA program, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. It really was a reflection of the DREAM Act, which I had introduced over 20 years ago. DACA has protected more than 800,000 young people from deportation, all of whom arrived in our country as children. These young people are known today as dreamers. They grew up alongside our kids, and many have gone on to serve our nation as service members, doctors, first responders. They believe in the American dream. I've come to the floor of the Senate 138 times, this is it, to tell their stories. I don't think there is any more compelling argument that can be made for the dreamers in DACA than to let people know exactly who they are, what they have done, and what they dream of. This is a story of a young woman who came to America at the age of 4, Alexandra Abranica. She first arrived in Orange County, California from the Philippines, and she vividly remembers sharing a single tiny room with all 6 of her family members. While attending college, Alessandra discovered a passion for healthcare, and she applied to the only medical school, which was accepting dreamers at the time, Loyola University Stritch School of Medicine in Chicago. In 2020, she was accepted to the school and received one of the first American Medical Association's Dream MD Equity Scholarships, which is given to DACA recipients or first-generation immigrants to study medicine. DACA has always intended to be a temporary solution. And since President Obama established the program, Republicans, for reasons I cannot explain to you in any political or human terms, have waged a relentless campaign to overturn it and to deport these dreamers back to the countries they may not even remember. Last September, a federal judge in Texas declared the DACA program illegal. Though the decision left in place protections for current DACA recipients like Alessandra while the appeal is pending, they live in fear the next court decision will end their careers and upend their lives. Until a permanent solution is written into law, Alessandra's service to her community is at risk, as is the service of other dreamers who work as teachers, doctors, engineers, and so many more important professions. The permanent solution is enacting the DREAM Act, a piece of legislation which I mentioned I introduced 2 decades ago. It would provide a path to citizenship for dreamers across America and allow them to live stable lives and to live out the American dream which they richly deserve. Immigrants have been a vital part of the American success story. Our nation still needs them. If DACA is struck down, experts predict that our economy will lose over $11 billion a year in lost wages. Moreover, as we face decreasing population, shortages of medical professionals, immigrants can help mitigate that gap. Without continued immigration, the U.S. working age population will shrink by over 6 million by the year 2040. As Americans retire, this could lead to a 23% reduction in monthly Social Security payouts to retirees. Remember, these immigrants, even undocumented, and dreamers are paying taxes and paying into Social Security for us, for our children, for the next generation. To resolve these challenges, we need to create additional lawful pathways for immigrants, while also providing legal status for our undocumented population who've been here for decades. That's why good faith efforts to reform and improve our broken immigration system cannot stop with this bill. Madam President, I think about the situation with these dreamers and what they are facing, and how many of them I met over the years. When I first introduced the bill, they used to come up to me in Chicago, wait until it got dark outside so no one would see them, and they'd whisper to me, "I'm a dreamer. Can you help me?" It became a cause for me, and certainly I've worked at it. I'm disappointed that I cannot tell a story of success even greater than we've achieved with DACA. But they are still waiting to hear. This bill that we're considering gives some help to what they call documented dreamers. Here's how it works. The H-1B visa is offered to foreign experts and professionals to come to the United States and work for 3 years, renewable 3 years. They can bring their families with them. A lot of people from China, from India, and other places come and take some critically important jobs in our economy under this program of H-1B. They are accompanied by their families. They continue to work, extending the year after year, in the hopes that eventually they will become citizens themselves of the United States through what's called a green card. But while they are doing this, their spouses cannot legally work in many instances, and their children are running a real risk. You see, when these kids reach the age of 21, they're no longer eligible to stay with their families. Now, these kids could have spent their whole lives in America because their family came there. They could have gone to school and succeeded over and over again. But to have a future in America, they need a green card. And if they don't get it by age 21, they're eligible for deportation. Does that make any sense at all? Well, this bill starts to solve that problem. And I certainly support the efforts to solve it and applaud those who were behind it. But the same conditions apply to dreamers. Brought here as little children, they were raised in the United States, went to school in the United States, stood up and pledged allegiance to that flag in the classroom every single morning, and they asked to be part of our future. They did nothing wrong. They were kids when they were brought here. Why they weren't included in this bill, I don't know. I'm sorry to say, I think there are a few senators who are just dead set on stopping the dreamers in DACA every chance they get. What a loss that would be to America, for us to lose that talent, that drive, that determination, that important part of our future. And what a commentary it is on us as Americans, that our nation of immigrants has no room for Alessandro and so many others who could make this a better nation. There are thousands of them. There were 800,000 under DACA initially, and there are many more that are still eligible. I'm sorry this bill does not include that provision for the dreamers, but I will tell you this, I'll fight for every opportunity I have to bring the DREAM Act before the United States Senate in the hope that one day we will give these young people exactly what they deserve, part of America's future. Madam President, I yield the floor.
The clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Baldwin.